I'm Jack, 52 years old, and I still feel like I'm chasing something that everyone else has already caught. Life hasn't turned out like I'd expected. Growing up, I thought by the time I reached my 50s, I'd be successful, secure, maybe even wealthy. But here I am, still working my 9 to 5, living paycheck to paycheck, and wondering where it all went wrong. I see people around me, friends, colleagues, even strangers, who seem to have their lives together. They've got their careers, families, homes, and there I am, trying to keep it all together, and always feeling like I'm one step behind. It's not that I haven't tried. I've worked hard. I've always given my best at everything. But life doesn't always reward hard work the way you expect it to. When I was younger, I had big dreams. I wanted to make a name for myself, maybe build a career I could be proud of, and have a family to share it all with. But the more I tried to climb that ladder, the more it felt like the rungs kept slipping out from under me. I've always struggled with money too. It's like I could never quite make enough to feel comfortable. I'd look at people with nice cars, homes, vacations, and wonder how they got there. I've never been able to shake the feeling that I'm not enough, not in the way I think people should be. The life I envisioned for myself always seemed to be just out of reach, and that feeling of never quite measuring up, it's stuck with me for years. I've been told a lot of things over the years. Jack, you've got potential. Jack, things will get better. But deep down, I started to doubt it. I began to believe maybe I just wasn't meant to be one of those people who had it all figured out. Relationships, career, money, it all felt like one long series of disappointments. And maybe that's why when I met Sarah, I let myself believe that this time things could be different. My past relationships are a blur of missed opportunities and broken promises. I've been with women who were incredible, women who could light up a room with their energy and warmth. But somehow, I always ended up feeling like I was just a side character in their lives. I didn't know how to make a woman see me as more than just someone to pass the time with. Maybe I didn't have the right things to offer, or maybe I just wasn't who they needed me to be. I don't know. I remember one relationship in particular with a woman named Katie. She was smart, funny, and beautiful, but I never seemed to live up to her expectations. I wasn't rich enough. I didn't have the same ambition she did. She used to say things like, "You're not going to get anywhere unless you're willing to sacrifice for it." And it felt like every day I spent with her was me trying harder to be someone I wasn't. One day, she called it quits. I remember her saying, "I need someone who's going to take charge of their life." That was the last straw for me. After that, I decided to take a break from dating. I thought maybe I wasn't meant for love. It wasn't just the breakups that hurt. It was the feeling that I wasn't seen for who I truly was. Every time I tried, it felt like I was just getting it wrong. I began to doubt myself, to question whether I was capable of being in a healthy, lasting relationship. It wasn't just my self-worth that took a hit, but my belief in love itself. So I buried my hopes deep inside. Maybe I wasn't meant for a family, or maybe I just wasn't built for a woman's love. But there was still that part of me, somewhere deep down, that yearned for it. And that's when Sarah came into the picture. When I was younger, I had all these dreams. I thought by the time I reached my 40s, I'd have a steady job I loved, a home, and a family. Maybe I'd be living the American dream, buying a house, taking vacations, maybe even being recognized for my work. I wanted the life that everyone else seemed to have, and I thought I was doing the right things to get there. But as the years went on, those dreams became more like distant memories. Every time I tried to reach for them, it felt like the universe pushed me back. As the years passed, I started questioning my decisions. Was it my fault? Had I chosen the wrong path? Did I spend too many years chasing things that didn't matter? I wasn't rich, and I wasn't successful in the way I thought I should be. And while I used to dream of a family, a wife and kids, it started to feel like that was out of my reach. The people I knew who had it all, career, family, stability, they seemed to have it so easily. For me, it felt like nothing ever came without a fight. My dreams were being buried under a mountain of responsibilities, and I couldn't see the way out. I tried to shift my focus. I convinced myself I could build something meaningful, something that didn't depend on traditional success. But I couldn't shake the feeling that I was always one step behind, even as I began to accept that my dreams might never fully come true. A small part of me still hoped. Maybe there was still time to find the right person, the right path. But little did I know that Sarah's arrival would force me to confront my own beliefs about success, love, and the meaning of happiness. It was at a friend's party where I first met Sarah. She was standing by the door, greeting people with that bright, infectious smile of hers. When she turned to look at me, it felt like time slowed down for just a second. There was something about her, something that drew me in. She wasn't the type to wait for someone to come to her. She had this energy about her that was impossible to ignore. She was confident, put together, and successful. And for the first time in a long time, I felt like maybe I could be someone worth her time. We started talking, and immediately I noticed how easy it was to be around her. There was no pretension, no games, just two people, talking, laughing, and getting to know each other. She listened to me, really listened, and before I knew it, hours had passed. By the end of the night, I had this strange feeling, this deep sense of connection. I didn't know it then, but meeting Sarah would be the beginning of everything changing for me. As we said our goodbyes, she gave me her number. And for the first time in years, I felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe this time would be different. Maybe this was the one relationship that could finally fill the void inside of me. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I wasn't just a side character in someone else's story. For the first time, someone truly saw me for who I was. In the weeks that followed, Sarah and I spent more time together. We went out on more dates, spent long evenings just talking about everything, from our childhoods to our dreams for the future. She was everything I'd hoped for, confident, ambitious, and incredibly smart. She was the kind of woman who could hold her own in any conversation, and I admired that. I wasn't used to being with someone who challenged me in the way she did, but it was exciting. It made me feel like I was growing, like I could finally reach the version of myself I had always wanted to be. But slowly, something started to shift. I began to put her needs above my own. I rearranged my schedule to accommodate hers, picked up her slack when she was too busy, and focused all my energy on making her feel supported. The more I tried to please her, the more I lost sight of myself. I was becoming someone I didn't recognize. I told myself I was just being a good partner. But deep down, I was terrified of losing her. I thought, if I can just be everything she needs, maybe I won't be left behind again. I began to think, this is it. This is the life I've been waiting for. But it didn't take long before I started to realize that while I was fully invested in her dreams, she was still chasing her career in ways that left little room for me. And at first, I didn't want to face it. I thought I could just work harder to make it work, to fit into the life she had carved out for herself. But as time went on, I started to wonder, was she really seeing me, or was I just filling a role in her life? It wasn't until a few months into our relationship that the weight of it all really hit me. I began to notice more and more how much I was sacrificing for Sarah and how little of it was being reciprocated. Sarah's career demands were relentless. More nights than not, she would cancel plans or show up late. I remember one particular evening where I had gone all out, cooked her favorite meal, lit candles, even picked out a movie we'd been wanting to watch together. She'd promised she'd be home at 7 p.m., but by 8:30, there was still no word from her. When she finally texted, it was brief, saying, "I'm stuck at work, can't make it tonight." My stomach sank. I tried not to let it show, but I was disappointed. I'd spent hours preparing, and now I was sitting alone with a cold dinner, trying to pretend like it didn't bother me. I think deep down, I was starting to realize something I hadn't wanted to admit. No matter how hard I tried, no matter how much I gave her, it wasn't enough to make her prioritize me. The following days were more of the same. She'd be busy with work, late-night meetings, and I'd be left waiting. But I didn't want to seem needy or demanding, so I kept telling myself, this is what she's passionate about. She's ambitious. She needs time for this. And yet the longer this went on, the more I started to feel invisible, as though I were just a placeholder in her life rather than someone she actively wanted to build a future with. I tried to be patient, tried to convince myself that everything would balance out eventually. But deep down, I couldn't help but wonder if I was making a mistake by letting this go on. The emotional toll it was taking on me was undeniable. I didn't want to live in a relationship where I felt like I was the one holding it together, where I was always waiting for the other person to show up. It wasn't the relationship I dreamed of. It was one where I was constantly waiting for something that might never come. The breakthrough came on one of those long, lonely nights. Sarah had been working late again, and I was at home, lying awake, staring at the ceiling. I couldn't stop thinking about everything: the dinners that had gone cold, the plans that had been cancelled, the evenings I had spent alone. I realized how much I had neglected my own needs, my own desires, just to accommodate her schedule, to fit into a life that wasn't truly mine. It wasn't just the loneliness that struck me. It was the realization that I had allowed myself to become so wrapped up in her world that I'd forgotten about mine. I had lost sight of what I wanted, of what made me happy, and I was only holding on to this relationship because I feared losing her. But at that moment, I had an epiphany. I had become so desperate for her love and attention that I had forgotten to love myself. I had lost my sense of self-worth, of my own desires and needs. I remember sitting up in bed and feeling this overwhelming sense of clarity wash over me. I wasn't being true to myself. I wasn't honoring my own dreams and goals. I had let my happiness become entirely dependent on her, and I couldn't keep living that way. It wasn't healthy, and it certainly wasn't love. Love should feel equal, supportive, and empowering, not like I was just waiting for scraps of attention when it suited her. It was painful, realizing that I had given so much and received so little in return. But it was also freeing. I knew what I had to do. I had to stop waiting. I had to stop hoping she would come around. It was time to take control of my own life again, to focus on myself and my own future. I wasn't going to be a placeholder in anyone's life anymore. It was time for me to take the lead in my own story. The next day, I called Sarah. I knew this conversation was coming, and I was dreading it. But deep down, I knew it was necessary. I couldn't keep living in this state of emotional limbo, hoping things would change, hoping she would suddenly have more time for me. I needed to let go, and I needed to do it now. When she picked up, there was a small sense of urgency in her voice, like she knew something was off. I told her I needed to talk, and we agreed to meet later that evening. I spent the entire day preparing myself for what I knew would be the hardest conversation of my life. The entire time, my mind raced. Would she be mad? Would she understand? Would she fight for us? The uncertainty made my stomach churn, but I knew I had to do this. When we sat down face to face, I took a deep breath. I told her everything. The loneliness, the emotional exhaustion, the feeling of being invisible in her life. I told her that while I loved her deeply, I could no longer stay in a relationship where I felt like I was always second place to her career. I couldn't keep sacrificing myself for someone who didn't seem to see me, who didn't seem to want to meet me halfway. Her face softened, and I saw a flicker of sadness in her eyes. She didn't argue or try to convince me to stay. Instead, she nodded slowly, as if she knew, deep down, that I was right. She admitted that she'd been so consumed with work that she hadn't been able to prioritize our relationship. It was a quiet, painful conversation, but we both knew it was necessary. We weren't right for each other, not in the way I had hoped. And with that, we said goodbye. In the days that followed, I felt an emotional whirlwind. Part of me felt liberated, like I had freed myself from something that was never truly mine. But another part of me was still grieving. I missed Sarah. I missed the idea of what we could have been. It wasn't easy to walk away from someone I had cared for deeply, someone who had filled so much of my heart. But over time, I began to see the bigger picture. I realized that the most important thing I had learned from this relationship was that love shouldn't be one-sided. It shouldn't feel like a constant struggle to make someone see you. A healthy relationship is built on mutual respect, support, and shared goals. Sarah had taught me a lot about my own desires, but more importantly, she taught me that I needed to prioritize myself again. It wasn't about fixing everything for someone else. It was about fixing myself first. So I started doing things for me. I got back into my hobbies, things I hadn't had time for in years. I reconnected with friends I'd lost touch with. I focused on my career and started setting new goals for myself, ones that didn't revolve around someone else. Slowly, I began to find peace again. I began to feel whole, and I began to see that my happiness didn't depend on anyone else. It depended on me. Looking back, I don't regret letting Sarah go. It was one of the hardest things I've ever done, but it was also one of the best decisions I could have made. I learned that sometimes letting go is the most loving thing you can do, for yourself and for the other person. And as I move forward in my life, I carry that lesson with me, that true love starts with self-love. Only when you're whole can you build a relationship that's healthy, lasting, and real.